Now, Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:07 on WMAL. Good Thursday morning to you. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson. We got Lanny Davis coming up in a half an hour. And Congressman Chris Van Hollen on the way at 8:36 this morning. Right now, Blair Lee joins us, Maryland political analyst and columnist for the Gazette newspapers. Good morning, Blair.
Hey, Brian.
All right, I want to get into these ballot questions that will be up for vote for people going to the polls in Maryland on November 6th. There are 7 of them total, which is a pretty large number. I'm going to skip questions 1, 2, and 3 and get to the more controversial ones so we get more time. Question 4 is rather lengthy, and it basically boils down to whether or not illegal immigrants should get in-state tuition in the state of Maryland, right?
Yep.
And that is a pretty cut and dry question, although it's worded in a way that I think puts it more sympathetic to allowing them to go there. I want to know how these questions are worded and who decides how these questions are worded on the ballot.
Very interesting. The questions are worded by the Secretary of State, although on the gambling expansion question, the suggested wording was actually put into the bill by the state legislature. So you're absolutely correct. To some extent, the deck is stacked and the dice are loaded just in the wording. The best example is the casino expansion, where the initial wording says, do you want to vote for expanding gambling in Maryland to help for education funding?
Right. All right. So is there any way to change that, or is this just the way it is?
I guess you could challenge it in court, but basically under state law, the Secretary of State is supposed to, in a fair and balanced way, provide the wording for the questions.
All right. The question number 5 actually has the fewest number of words of all of them, and it just says, establishes the boundaries for the state's 8 U.S. congressional districts based on recent census figures as required by the United States Constitution.
See, I think that wording is loaded, Brian, because when you add as required by the Constitution, the uneducated voter thinks, oh, I'm just going to ratify the Constitution.
Right.
Of course I'll vote in favor of that. So it's subtle, but it's there.
All right. And these are basically straight yes or no questions, right?
Exactly. What you have here are 4 acts of the General Assembly which have been brought to the voters by petition, by more than 56,000 valid voter signatures being collected in 1.5 months after passage of the bills. In other words, under our Constitution, the voters of Maryland, if they sign enough petitions, can take a bill to the ballot on Election Day and have the voters of the state either reject that bill or confirm that bill.
I've heard a lot of complaints from people saying, you know what, I wish I could pick and choose in parts of the questions, especially when it comes to gambling. I would be okay in favor of expanding, card tables and, in that aspect, but I don't want to open up a new one in Prince George's County, or, I want to make sure that they're not getting a tax cut. But there's just no, it's either you eat the whole thing or you don't. Exactly.
In other words, that question was before the Assembly. They could have enacted table games. They could have added table games, but not had a 6th venue in Prince George's County. But the Assembly decided to go for the whole enchilada, and that is what the voters are going to either vote up or down, yes or no.
All right, so you got this immigration, should they be able to be educated?
The DREAM Act. It's called the DREAM Act.
Okay, got the DREAM Act, you got the thing about gay marriage, and you got this thing about gaming in the state of Maryland.
And congressional districts.
Exactly. And what's really interesting here is that this is the first time in 20 years that a measure of the Assembly has been brought to a ballot, brought to referendum by petition. 20 years ago, the Assembly passed a very liberal abortion law. The petitions were signed and raised, and it was brought to the voters in November of 1992, and the law was overwhelmingly upheld by the voters. We haven't had one go to referendum in the last 20 years. This year, we have 4 of them on the ballot.
How about that? Well, proponents of the gay marriage amendment have said that they really are sort of disappointed that there are so many issues on the ballot, because they thought if they were and they were on there cleanly, and gaming was not on there, for example, that their case might fare better instead of
more complicated than that. During the special session this month, the gay lobby sent a flyer to all of the members of the House of Delegates asking them not to vote for the gambling expansion bill, and here's why. Under the gambling expansion bill, the voters of Prince George's County must approve gambling expansion or it fails. Prince George's County, predominantly African American, is going to be the battleground for the gambling expansion. However, the gay marriage bill is also on the same ballot, and this all goes into the relationship now between these four questions. The gambling expansion is going to result in a very large Prince George's County African American voter turnout. However, the gay lobby knows that African Americans historically vote against same-sex marriage 60 to 40. So every time you bring out more African Americans to vote for gambling expansion, you're hurting the gay marriage question.
I can see those two items going down.
No one knows. What's really crazy here is to have these four measures that have no relationship to each other whatsoever be on the same ballot where they're going to actually impact each other in terms of voter turnout. If I come out because I'm on fire about same-sex marriage and I don't care about casino gambling or the DREAM Act, I'm probably going to vote for those measures either yes or no as well, and Lord knows how I'm going to bounce on those.
Do we know if people vote on every single issue, or do they just go for one particular ballot question?
Generally, people vote, for example, school board and all the rest.
Yeah.
If people go to the polls, they generally go ahead and check every box. Right. Well, whether they'll do that on the ballot questions, we don't know, because we've never had four questions before together on the ballot, so that remains to be seen.
All right, there's one question, though, that would affect the budget or would affect perhaps taxes down the road, and that is question 7 about gambling. If it goes down, what does that mean for next year's General Assembly session?
Well, it will probably come back again next year for the General Assembly session. I mean, this is all inside baseball. The president of the state Senate, Mike Miller, feels that he had a promise from the House of Delegates that he would get his gambling expansion bill through. That didn't happen, and a lot of pundits in Annapolis think that Mike Miller will keep on pushing this until he's in his grave. That, to me, is not a great reason to pass something just because you want to, quote, get it behind you and make Mike Miller happy.
All right, and the question on the congressional districts, if that goes down, then what happens?
That's a great question. Let me give you the answer. What you would do if you vote down the congressional redistricting map, under our Constitution, the governor and the assembly will simply next January go back and pass another redistricting map. It's up to them whether they vote the exact same map or a slightly different map, or whether they take the results of the referendum election and draft an entirely different map because they feel the voters have rejected what they did back last year in special session. But you're right, they will simply go back and create a whole new map. Now, there's an interesting situation in Montgomery County where the Ike Leggett, the county executive, and the county council passed the ambulance fee bill a couple years ago.
Right.
Volunteer firefighters took it to referendum. The people of Montgomery County went along with the volunteer firefighters, and they defeated the ambulance fee. And sure enough, Ike Leggett and the Assembly went and reenacted the ambulance fee again this year. So in a way, you're right. If they want to, the governor and the Assembly can just wear down the voters by reenacting the same measures year after year.
I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but will we get the results right away when we find out, where the voting goes on November 6th this night?
Absolutely. In other words, most of this is now electronic, so just as you know what the results are in the presidential race and the U.S. Senate race, you're going to also know the results on these questions pretty darn quick.
All right, Blair. It's great to have you on, as always. We appreciate your insight.
Good stuff.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Blair.